Web components. It's about time, right? These things were first proposed back in 2011. A guy named Alex Russell spoke about them at the Frontiers conference in the Netherlands. And through the magic of the internet, you can watch his talk if you are so inclined. It's long. And he spends the first 45 minutes actually talking about why anyone would even care about something like web components, because it was 2011 and nobody had really conceived of the idea of writing like a component-based web architecture. Alex worked at Chrome, or works at Chrome, so they were pretty quick to pick it up. They were right on board. But unfortunately, the other browsers, they weren't really that into it. So to this day, Chrome is actually the only browser that ever implemented the original web component spec. As for developers, we weren't really that into it either. Chrome also built Polymer, which is a framework for building web components cross-browser. So even though the other browsers don't support them, you can build them in Polymer, and that will make them cross-browser, if that's what you're into. Yeah, developers also weren't that into them, because we were all having too much fun writing jQuery plugins. So we're like, hey, what's the point? It's now 2018 though, and a couple of things have changed. Like my slides, apparently. Come back. A couple of things have changed. So these days, jQuery has been largely replaced with frameworks like Angular, React, and Vue. And if you're writing an app in a framework like this, what are you writing it in? Components! The other thing is that with all these components out in the wild now, the spec writers, I guess, have had a bit of inspiration, and they've seen how components can work in the wild. They've come up with a new version of the web component spec, which is supported by all modern browsers, more or less-ish. Edge is the only modern browser that doesn't have support for web components natively at the moment, and they are working on it as we speak. Well, probably not as we speak, because they're probably in the US and they're probably sleeping, but soon. IE, of course, does not have support, because IE doesn't have nice things. There are polyfills available, so you can get these things working in IE if that's your jam. They're a little bit fiddly, but so is everything else in IE. And completely incidentally, you know there are people who write cartoons online that have like the browsers as My Little Ponies, and the ones with Internet Explorer in them are fucking heartbreaking. So sad. Yeah, so we have web components available now, natively in the browsers, more or less, but we also have these frameworks, right? So, do we really need both? If web components and frameworks were to fight, who would win? Well, the frameworks have got a few things going for them. Frameworks like Angular and Vue give you automatic change detection. All of the frameworks give you binding between your JavaScript model and your HTML view. You get state management with things like Redux or Angular services or whatever it is you do in Vue. And you get routing, which is pretty handy, right? Being able to map part of the state of your application to a URL is pretty useful. The other thing that frameworks have over web components is inter-component communication. So if you've got your component tree like this, web components are pretty good at communication between the parent and the child element. They're not so great at communication back from the child to the parent, or between sibling elements, or elements that live in completely different parts of the app, which is something that frameworks are pretty good at. Now you could like build all this stuff on top of web components so that you had all that functionality, but at that point, like, you really just built a framework, right? Why not just use one of the ones that exists? So the real power of web components comes from their flexibility. So web components are native in the browser, right? So you can use them anywhere. We have a look, there's a page called Custom Elements Everywhere, which will tell you if web components will work with your favorite framework. Spoiler alert, probably. If you look through, you can see most of the frameworks and libraries out there have got pretty much full support of web components. The one exception is a little framework, I don't know if anyone's heard of it, React. There's some issues in React around passing object attributes into web components. They don't stringify them properly. And React uses a synthetic event system, which is hard for web components to hook into. But there are open issues working to fix that. So soon. It's not just frameworks though, right? I don't know about where you all work, but most of the places I've worked, we have an app, but we also have like a static site built in a content management system that goes along with that app. And generally speaking, we want to have like a consistent look and feel between those two pages. So web components gives us the ability to combine, to reuse things from our web app in our content management system, without having to replicate all that work between the two. So they will work with WordPress, Drupal, Joomla, and AEM, and probably a bunch of others that I've not seen. Some of them you do need plugins, but they will work. So the answer to who would win a fight out of web components and frameworks is it's not really a fight. They can work together. Cool. So now I've convinced you that web components are absolutely a thing, and I did it way faster than Alex Russell did in his talk. So let's have a look at how we actually use them. First things though, there are a bunch of libraries and things available to help you with this. So we've got hybrids, lit HTML, and lit elements, stencil, and slim.js, and of course Polymer. And those things can all help you with like cutting down on the boilerplate and filling in some of those gaps. We're not going to talk about those today. We're just going to look at the actual native implementation of web components. Now, if you were paying attention earlier, you would have noticed my slide that showed the browser compatibility actually lists 4 different specs, because web components are actually 4 different specs. The first one is ES modules. And hopefully everybody here already knows how they work, because that's just your normal import JavaScript, like import X from Y. So I'm not going to talk about that. The second one is HTML templates, which is actually really cool. It's a way of like reusing bits of HTML across an element, kind of like mix-ins in Sass. Unfortunately, it kind of relies on another spec called HTML imports, which would have allowed you to import HTML like you can with JavaScript and CSS. And that spec got bumped in favor of ES modules, so it's not a thing anymore. So I haven't worked out a good way to use HTML templates as much as I like them. You will see them in Polymer components though. So they are around, but we're not going to talk about them anymore today. So that just leaves custom elements and Shadow DOM, the light side and the dark side. I'm going to start with the light side, custom elements. So custom elements give you a way to register new HTML tags. You can create brand new HTML tags. And they let you control the lifecycle and the behavior of those new elements. What they don't allow you to do is to control the content or the presentation, right? So it's just about lifecycle and behavior. You can create a new tag. Super easy. Custom elements.define. Custom elements is just a global object in the browser. You pass in a tag name. The tag names are global in your app, so watch out for namespace collisions, I guess. And it must have a hyphen in it. That's the only rule. There must be a hyphen in your name. The browser would treat tags with no hyphens as like native tags, and ones with hyphens it assumes is a custom element. And then you need to give it a class. And the class is going to define the behavior. So your class needs to extend HTML element or one of its children. It has to have a constructor, which calls super, and you may implement any of these for lifecycle callbacks. So connected callback is called when your element gets added to the DOM, disconnected when it's taken away, adopted when it's moved from one to another, and attribute change callback unsurprisingly, is when the attributes are changed. I'm not going to have time to go through them all today, but they are there if you need them. So let's look at an example. This is a custom element. It doesn't look like much, but when you click on it, it gets bigger. If we have a look in the DevTools, we can see expanding bubble. It's right there. That's a thing. Let's have a look at how we might make that. So we start with our expanding bubble. What should we do first? We need a class. And it needs to extend HTML element. It needs a constructor, which is going to call super. And then we just need to define our element. And we're going to call it expanding bubble. And we'll pass it our class. So that's our element ready to go. Now, like I said, the custom element can't control what the thing looks like. So we need to just define a bit of CSS outside of the custom element for that to work. So expanding bubble is going to have a border of 8 pixels, solid green. The green is coming from a custom property in that shared CSS there. It's a bubble, so it needs to be round. 50%. I just want it to appear in the middle of the page. So we'll have a margin. And we want it to wobble when it grows. So we're going to do like height and width. Right, so that's just standard CSS, the same as anything else. And we can put our element on the page. And if we flick back to the browser, we can see our element there. It's in the DevTools, but it doesn't do anything yet because we haven't given it any behavior, obviously. To do that, we want an onClick handler. And we can do that just using this.onClick. So inside your custom element, this refers to that particular element on the page. We want to know how big it is. So again, we just use this to get a reference to the element and find out its size. We want the diameter. Okay, we're going to spell it that way today. To get twice as big. And then we just want to set the style. Diameter. And the height. Oh, new diameter. No. Oh, yeah, new diameter, I think you'll find. New diameter. All right, so now if we refresh the page, our bubble grows. So that is a custom element. That's pretty exciting, right? Yeah, pretty useless. Can't put anything inside it, right? So that's custom elements. Next, let's go back to the slides because that will probably work better. Let's have a look at Shadow DOM, which is, the dark side of the force. Shadow DOM is something that has actually been around for ages, and you've almost certainly used it, possibly without realizing it. Shadow DOM is what browsers use when they create elements like this that are clearly a bunch of stuff, but they appear as just a single element in the DOM. So for instance, a video element quite clearly has a container, a place for viewing the video. This is a button. This is a button. This is a range slider. This is some stuff. This is a button. Like, these are all things, right? And we look in the DevTools, though, it's just a single element. So the same thing with like a file selector, and a select is very interesting. But you know these things because they are a complete pain in the ass to style, right? Yeah, so they look like a single element if we open them in Firefox. If, however, we look at the same thing in Chrome, so there's our video element, we can actually go into the Chrome DevTools, and in the settings, there is a setting that says Show User Agent Shadow DOM. If we look now, our video element suddenly has content inside of it. And under there, we can see the shadow root, which is clearly special because it's a different color. And inside of there, there's all of the things that are clearly in that video. So labels and whatnot. They're there, but they're also not really there. If I do a query selector for video element and a div inside of it, there's nothing there, right? I can't see it. So this is the shadow DOM. It's a piece of DOM that exists, but it's kind of invisible. It's like encapsulated away from the main DOM. It's not just impervious to JavaScript like this, you also can't target it with CSS. If we wrote a CSS rule like this, it just wouldn't find anything. So shadow DOM, the specification, is kind of like making that available for developers. You can create a shadow DOM, a bit of shadow DOM, by just finding an element on the page and calling attach shadow. That will give it a shadow root. You need to give it a mode. The options are open or closed. Closed will work just like the user agent shadow DOM and make your thing completely untargetable by CSS or JavaScript. Open, like we've got here, is still untargetable by CSS, but it will be able to be targeted by JavaScript. And then we can stick stuff in it, just the same way that you would stick stuff in any other element. So shadow root.innerHTML, or you can append child, or whatever takes your fancy. Cool, so this is a shadow DOM element. The green box on the outside is in the light DOM. The blue box inside is in the shadow DOM. So we can have a look at that. Where are you? So there's our green box on the outside, and then we've got a shadow root, and inside is our inside box. Because it was created with a mode open, which you can see here, we can hit it with JavaScript. So we just document.query selector, what's it called? .inner. Nope, that won't work. That won't work at all. You need to start with the outer element, so my element, and then grab the shadow root, and then the query selector .inner. So you can still target it, so like we could change the color. Rebecca purple, and that changes to purple. So we can target with JavaScript. You just need to go via that shadow root. That was explicitly. You can't hit it with CSS. The one thing that will work, actually, is if I use a custom property. That won't work from there. You can use custom properties. Custom properties will go through the shadow DOM. I promise. You'll just have to trust me on that one. All right, so shadow DOM. Impervious to CSS, except for custom properties. Semi-impervious to JavaScript, depending on how you want to play it. And completely vulnerable to DevTools in all browsers that support shadow DOM, even Safari. All right, so where things start getting interesting though, right, is when we combine the two. When we have the light side and the dark side working together. And we can do that here. This is an example of a custom element with shadow DOM. Like I said before, our custom element can't have content inside it, right? But shadow DOM is invisible. So we can attach shadow DOM inside our custom element, and then that gives it like content and presentation and stuff like that. So this is a custom element with shadow DOM. It is like an emoji picker. you know, like on Facebook posts where you can have a reaction. This one allows you to pick reactions from the 3 classic emotions: happy, sad, and aerial tramway. You can pick one of those and it'll appear on the post. Aerial tramway is a sadly underused emoji. So, how did we make this amazing piece of work? I've started with a bit of this code already written because I've checked, and watching me write CSS is really boring. And I've got our emojis ready to go there because I don't know how to type them. If anyone has any ideas. We've got our element on the page. We've got our class here ready to go. We've got our constructor, which calls super. And we've defined our element on the page. And we've got that in our browser right here. It looks like nothing. Cool. So what we need to do is, first of all, attach the shadow root. So this dot attach shadow. Shall we go mode open or closed? Open? All right, we'll do open. Once we've got that shadow root, then, like I said before, we can just attach stuff to it the way we would anything else. And so this dot shadow root gives us a reference to the shadow root, funnily enough. And we can just set the inner HTML. Now, I'm just going to do a little hack that is going to make the syntax highlighting inside of the template string work. There are tools available which will do this for you properly, but like I said, we're just going native today. So I've got a plugin that will highlight HTML inside of a thing that's got HTML on it. So this is our styling. It's just CSS. I'm sure we all love CSS, and it all does exactly what we want every time. The one interesting thing here is this host selector. This refers to the shadow root itself. We can't use the tag name inside of the shadow root as a selector because the tag is outside of the shadow root and things can't get through. So we just use this host to refer to the top level of the element. Then we need some actual stuff. We want a div class of emoji panel, which will have our 3 emoji choices on it. One thing that doesn't work is autocomplete the way I want it to. And we want the element for when we've selected the emoji. So now if we look at our page, we've got the box here, and that's the border of the emoji panel that doesn't have anything in it yet because we didn't put anything in it. So what we want are some buttons so that we can select our emojis. We'll probably want 3 because we have approximately 3 emoji. And we'll just grab these emoji I prepared earlier. And yes, I know the indenting on that CSS is all off, but I'm pretending that it's not. Okay, so now we've got some content in there, just like that, easy. Obviously, we don't want that panel to appear when we first open the thing. So I've got a bit of CSS that's got a class that's hidden. It's going to hide it. Yep, that's how we want it to look to start with. Then we want, when we hover over the plus, we want the panel to appear, which this show emoji panel here will do. So we can just go this dot on mouse enter equals this dot show emoji panel. In this element here, obviously I've got this dot emoji panel, which we haven't defined. So this dot emoji panel equals this dot shadow root again, dot query selector emoji panel. So now when we hover, it appears. Hooray! Obviously we want it to disappear when we do the opposite. This dot hide emoji panel, which is just putting that class back on. Hooray! So the last thing we need to do is add on-click handlers for the buttons. Which again, like, this isn't rocket surgery. It's just, we grab the buttons, and we can just use button as our query selector because this is only going to search inside the shadow root, so it's only going to find things that belong to this element anyway. And then for each button, we can add an event listener. Let's click. I've got it defined down here already. Select emoji. These click handlers aren't on the element, right? They're on a child element, so we're going to need to bind this. And the last thing is that this is using this .selected emoji, which we don't have defined anywhere. So all this boilerplate query selector stuff, this is what the libraries and stuff can help you with. Selected emoji. Yep, so that's just grabbing the button, looking at the text content of the button, and setting that to the text content of the other thing. So if we refresh, we've got a button. So there is a custom element with shadow root that actually does a thing, which is like way more exciting than the bubble. That's not going to work because that's not my slides. Cool. So Shadow DOM is great, and it's really good to be able to encapsulate stuff like that, but sometimes you want to pass information between the two, between the light DOM and the dark DOM? The Shadow DOM. You can do that a couple of different ways. One, like I said before, is custom properties CSS will work. You can pass, they'll pass through the barrier. The other thing you can do, like normally you don't want to pass CSS though, right? You want to pass actual data. So one way to do that is using attributes. You can just set an attribute on your custom element, and then you can access that just using this .attribute name. The other thing you can do is something called slots, which again is something you've seen before. If we have a look at this in Chrome, you can see our select element is there, and it's got a shadow root, but the options aren't in the shadow root, right? They're still in the light DOM. If we have a look inside the shadow root, there's this thing called slot, which then has like pointers to the options in the light DOM, right? Sort of like symlinks, I guess. So we can do that in our element as well. We can create something like our new social media that's going to fill in the gap left by Google+. We've got the user's avatar, which we need to pass in as a string because we need the image source. And we've got some content that we can pass in, which we need to be HTML because we might want to like add a link to a castle location or something there. And obviously we've got our emoji picker so that we can aerial tramway everything. So to do that, we're going to do it really fast. It's going to be great. Don't save, go away. Okay, so I've got most of the stuff set up here. We've got all our HTML, not our HTML. We've got all of our style. We'll just add our HTML. We want an avatar, which is going to have an image in it, which is going to have a source, which we will sort out in a second. We're going to have content. And we're going to have our emoji picker. All right, so we look at that on the page now. We've basically got the outline of our thing. So we just need to pass in that avatar and the actual content. So we can grab the avatar, which we've got up here as an attribute. So we can say avatar equals this dot attributes dot avatar.value. Don't forget that, otherwise things won't work and you'll be confused. Don't ask me how I know. This is a template string, so we can just pass the value straight in. And if we look now, we have Bowser. Then to pass in the actual content, which we've got up here just inside the post there. That's even easier. We just go into our div where we want it, and we create a slot. Done. You can have multiple slots if you want. You just need to give them names, basically. Okay, so that is Shadow DOM plus custom elements. They're available in almost all browsers, and they work with almost all frameworks. Obviously, that was just a really quick overview of what's possible. There was a bunch of stuff I didn't go into, but hopefully you are now all motivated to go out and check out things like multiple slots with names and the lifecycle events and all of those amazing libraries and frameworks that are available to help you out. Thank you. I've been Erin Zimmer. Like Robin said, I work at Shine Solutions, and we are looking for people, so come talk to me if you're interested in an opportunity. And as always, my slides are available on GitHub pages. Thank you.